Hey everybody, welcome again to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. This is Brian Hunt. As you know, we like to cover risk in lots of different facets and maybe focus on construction real estate, but we all know risk permeates throughout the global economy. And so things that can happen on the other side of the world can impact here. But, risk comes in many different facets. There's also just risk of, living your life and, your career and advancement. And there's a lot of things that can maybe stumble along the way or maybe prevent you from getting what you think is the most out of your career. And part of that is building networks, building relationships, and having that ability to sort of not just work and do your job and go home, but how do you establish relationships that sort of not just support you at your career, but also support you in life. And we think about, especially in this day and age, maybe even since COVID, you hear stories about young men having problems with isolation and loneliness, and lots of people just feeling sort of alone where they work. Maybe they work hybrid, maybe they work remotely. And that's obviously tough to build relationships. But during 9 to 5, you work with, and sometimes a lot of people feel like they have no relationships or feel isolated outside of work. And that wasn't always the case. And so what's changed, in years, and what can maybe people think about to do to change that for the better? And so when I had the good fortune a couple of years ago at my prior employer, we did a multi-day training seminar in Chicago. And due to our relationships, we got to have a phenomenal lecturer come to us from the Booth School at University of Chicago. And I personally loved his course and what he was telling us. And I learned a lot. And I think it's been very helpful for me in my career over years, thinking about connecting the dots and having a network and relying upon all my skills socially to help build my network and help advance my career. And so when I started doing these shows, I always had the mindset I really wanted him to come be on this show. And he's a very busy man, but I think timing worked out well to fit his schedule because he's got a book coming out. So I am very, very excited to introduce you to Mr. John Burrows. John, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thrilled to be here, Brian. So
Great.
Really excited.
No, it's excited to have you, John. Like I said, didn't know you at all until we had that, seminar in Chicago. I just really loved what you talked, and it's been beneficial to me. And I think as we were talking offline, how things are sort of developing in, social networks, since especially, well, not just COVID, but I think COVID, like you and I were talking, we'll get to that later, has made it exasperated. Just the whole concept of connecting, and networking. So, really excited this conversation. I know you've got a book coming out. I want to delve into that. But before we, kind of get into that, John, I'd love to people get some of your background. So, John, if you and I are playing a modified game, we're about the same age. We're playing modified game, and where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Where in the world is John Burrows right now?
Where in the world? I am in lovely Southwest Michigan. In a little town called Buchanan, about an hour and 20 minutes or so from Chicago. So in normal circumstances, I might just pretend I was in Chicago. Much of my week is spent at the University of Chicago, where, as Brian said, I'm a professor. I teach business students and public policy students at U Chicago. But these days, with my children have left the nest, as it were.
Okay.
We get to trade suburban Chicago for a little piece of paradise in Southwest Michigan.
Fantastic.
And the trade-off is a somewhat arduous commute occasionally, especially when we're dealing with 20 inches plus of snow. Just won't stop.
Well, I got to say, Chicago is one of my favorite towns, but not a place I don't want to hang out during the wintertime. But at least in Chicago and Detroit, you guys know how to deal with snow. We get a couple inches or in a little bit of ice, and everything goes to hell down here. So.
But I will say this, Brian, joking aside, like I used to say, well, Chicago, you get the cold without any of the perks of winter, right? You haven't got the mountains, you don't have the beautiful snow-covered vistas.
Yeah.
And I do have the snow-covered vistas here, but I didn't realize lake effect snow is a really real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I always used to dismiss it. Oh, it's just a couple of extra inches here and there. And I'm going to say the last week, it has not stopped snowing here. Fortunately, some locals have told me this is sort of the worst snow they've seen in 20 years, but still, it's mind-boggling. Like, you go to bed every night and there's another 4 to 6 inches on the car each morning.
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm from Dallas, originally born and raised, but my parents are from Connecticut. They moved when I was in high school. I did 4 winters in Connecticut. Like, I'm not a long winter guy. Well, John, I'd love to delve into the book, but I want to sort of build up about your background. And so, first of all, John, based upon your accent, I don't think you're from these parts originally. Is that correct?
Actually, I don't know what Brian, whether I made this quip when I introduced myself to the Aeon crowd years ago.
Yeah.
But I often do jest. Where do I sound like I'm from? Right. I won't get offended. And the answers that usually come back to me, well, you sound like an Aussie. You sound like a Kiwi. Mm-hmm. And as I think Brian, this is what 32 years or so of living in America does to an originally English accent.
Amen.
So, but I've got one son is in university in New Zealand, one's in university in Australia, okay. And at some point in the months ahead, I'm looking forward to visiting both of them, and I'll find out from the locals. Do I really sound like an Aussie or a Kiwi? We will see.
So, did you grow up in England? Did you go through grade school and college and university, everything in England, or did you
no? So I finished high school in the UK. So I turned 18. And I decided I wanted a life in America, right, for a variety of reasons, and I'm happy to, if relevant, sort of tell a longer version of that story. But I grew up, a kid in suburban England, and so it's England of the 80s, right, which is very, very status and class conscious in a way that I don't think Americans can typically relate to. And I came from, I don't want to say, I was, from the wrong side of the tracks, but my parents hadn't gone to university. We were sort of, upper, lower class, lower middle class. Mm-hmm. I had aspirations that in the UK were just kind of above one station, right? I wanted to go to Oxford. Well, boys like you don't go to Oxford. And growing up in the 80s watching, American sitcoms and Law and Order, Baywatch, Chips, it just looked like this world of opportunity and meritocracy, right? And a sense in which, people cared more about what you can do than where you come from, right? Yeah. And that meant a lot to me, right? It was a sense in which, I can live this American dream. So I was able, when I was 18, to finagle a way to come to the US for what I thought might only be a few months. So I volunteered with Amnesty International and ended up doing some work for the Mississippi Capital Defense Resource Center in Jackson, Mississippi, of all places.
Wow.
And ended up kind of taking the SAT, applying to colleges over here, and was fortunate enough to be offered an opportunity to stay, and kind of never really went back. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration, but I didn't really go back for years. My parents ended up following me, and the rest is history.
So where'd you end up going for undergraduate?
I went to a little liberal arts college in upstate New York called Vassar. So classes were 15, 20 students, probably on the high end. Some were 4 or 5. No teaching assistants, but I don't want to throw shade at Poughkeepsie, New York, but Poughkeepsie, New York, in the early mid 90s was a very quiet place. Vassar was billed as close to Manhattan, not so much. 2.5 hours wasn't the easy trip into Manhattan, but I got to say, provided an excellent education, and I was grateful to receive good financial aid package that made it workable for me.
No, I'm with you, because I actually went to a small liberal arts school outside Austin, Southwestern University in Georgetown. 1,200 students at the most. But
wow, even smaller. Vassar was like 2,500.
Okay, so even smaller than you, But obviously, it was like get the one-on-one with your professors. 15 to 30 in a class.
And I think in terms of connection, right,
Mm-hmm.
quality of connection, right,
absolutely,
extremely valuable. I think again there are I had a much tighter bond with professors than I think the average student at a much larger institution gets to have, and there's value there.
So obviously you worked out of school and you had some very distinguished background as far as working at Accenture and other firms. What was sort of your thought process coming out of college? I mean, what was your initial thought? What was your career going to be? So,
Brian, I don't want to turn this into John's career stumbles, right?
That's how you learned.
Fail upwards, I guess, is the. In all honesty, I've bounced around. And one of the things I often tell my younger students that I teach undergrads, right, is they're all nervous about, what am I going to do next? And I'm like, look, I'm 52. I'm not quite sure I know what I'm going to do next. And I'm not entirely joking, right? Which is not, not to say I'm not happy at Chicago and expect to stay there. But in some very real sense, I want to do all the side quests. So I think what fired me up when I was in college was a desire to either do civil rights work, or that was, as I say, what brought me to the US originally, or to make the world a better place, as potentially a professor, right? As a thought that, can I move the needle on conversations around things that matter, perhaps in the public policy sphere, right? So, I'll try and keep this short-ish, right? Which is, I got out of college and thought, well, I want to go to law school, but I'm going to have to borrow a lot of money for law school, and in order to pay that off, although I might like to do civil rights work, I'm probably going to have to do a stint, in the private, corporate law. Why don't I go and become a paralegal just to kind of see how that works, check that box on the resume, also establish Virginia residency, because I wouldn't mind going to UVA. That would be quite a nice place to be a law student.
Sure.
I worked at some law firm that I will not name, and absolutely despised it.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely despised it, and decided that was not the path for me. I pivoted and ended up going to UVA to start a PhD, and very quickly realized that also at that time in my life, for reasons I can elaborate on, didn't feel like the right fit for me. So then I'm kind of I'm a dropout of a PhD program. I'm stumbling around. What do I do?
Yeah.
You become a public sector consultant, obviously.
Sure.
Right? So actually that was the path into a consulting role at Arthur Andersen, company that's no longer with us, but was the parent organization of Accenture, Andersen Consulting, that ultimately became Accenture. And sort of funnily enough, I came full circle in that later in my professional career, before I blew it all up to get my PhD in my mid-30s, I ended up back at Accenture, this time as a partner in their New York office.
So obviously, working at Accenture, you're building teams, you're working, cross-functional, you're going to different companies, you're trying to dissect them. I mean, I imagine that was been a really good maybe foundation or lab when you started. Maybe was that when you had this sort of concept of networking and?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I would say I don't necessarily want to call out Accenture specifically so much as the series of companies I worked in roles that were oriented around sales and service and delivery of those, right? So I would say, I did a couple of startups, one big, MicroStrategy, now Strategy. This is Mike Saylor's company, the big Bitcoin guy. Yeah, I was there when the stock was trading at approximately $300 and cratered to, I think, less than $1, right? Go look up that chart. I was sat in a corporate classroom when that happened, going, I guess I'm not going to be retiring at age 27 on Caribbean Island. And here I am, somewhat of a Bitcoin believer, and feeling like, am I giving Saylor the ability to financially ruin me a second time in my life? So no, I worked at MicroStrategy. I worked at a company called Market Switch that was sold to Experian. I worked at Siebel when they were acquired by Oracle. I did a stint at Oracle and then ultimately ended up at Accenture. But I was always selling things, right? Services, enterprise software, and into large, complex organizations. And I think what I came to realize intuitively then was just that the org chart isn't the real story, right? The org chart is legible, right? I can go out to the website and pull up the org chart for Barclaycard or Vodafone Ireland or whomever I'm trying to sell to. But I can assume that, well, the further someone is to the top of that org chart, they're surely the decision maker, right? Or if they're not the decision maker, presumably someone who direct reports into them or direct reports into the person who direct reports into them, right? Yeah. But as anyone who's been around complex organizations for a while quickly realizes, is that's not the real map. That's not the org chart that really matters, right? The org chart that really matters is the informal relationships that exist within organizations, and often are not captured in an elegant image that I can access on the website of the firm, right? I have to go talk to people. I have to sketch it on the back of an envelope or a napkin when I'm out at lunch. Who are the who are the people who really get things done in this organization, right? And I think, so I intuitively came to have a realization of that. And I think it was quite an effective salesperson. I would say I was a much better salesperson at Siebel and Oracle than I was a partner at Accenture, for reasons I'll elaborate on later if you care. But what I realized is this fascinates me, right? This disconnect between what we think is important, the formal org chart, and how stuff actually happens everywhere I've seen, right? And I've got exposure to a lot of data points around the world, right? This isn't just selling in North America. This is, continental Europe, the UK, exposure in the Middle East, exposure in Africa, Far East, and so on. So China and Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, lots of data points, but keep coming back to the same thing, right? The same thing is the real org chart lies. And I think that's kind of a thread of the book, but has become a thread of much of my academic career, is how do you teach young and not so young students the importance of this?
So before we get into the rest, I want to take a second. So for everybody who's watching, obviously we're having a conversation with John Burrows. He's a professor at the University of Chicago Booth School, and also, how do you pronounce the one in Europe you're working with?
Said. Associate Fellow at Said, Oxford.
Fantastic. Some fly-by-night organization. So, if you have any questions for John as we talk, please look to your bottom right-hand corner. You see a picture of me, and there's add a comment. You can go ahead and type in a comment. And as long as you keep it clean, I'll bring it to John's attention. So that might be a good segue, John, because I met you. We were at a class. You're back at Aon talking about networking, and you had an example there in the book respects to talking to people and respects to building a network. And there was a book we referred to as far as bowling alone. Do you want to talk about some of the premise of that'll help us get into
totally. Great question. So the book Bowling Alone was written in 92 by Robert Putnam. Absolutely fabulous book, and one that I think is worth reading regardless of your domain of interest, right? It's a popular book, but it should be even more popular than it is. So Putnam was writing in the early 90s, and what he wanted to understand was, why is it, if we trace an arc from sort of 1950s America to sort of late 1980s, early 1990s when he was writing, why is it we see that sort of in 1950s people feel enmeshed in their communities, they feel valued by their communities, and this has sort of lots of positive outcomes, which is people seem to turn out for all manner of elections, high visibility national elections, who's going to be my president, but also who's going to be on the school board, who's my alderman, who's my mayor. And if we trace from sort of the 1950s era through to when Putnam wrote the first edition of the book in the early 1990s, we see this kind of precipitous decline in engagement with our communities. And Putnam's sort of fascinated by what's going on, what's going on, what explains this, and obviously, hopefully, by better understanding the root causes, can we potentially propose some solutions? The book is called Bowling Alone, so obviously the answer in some part has something to do with bowling, and this is how. Is in the 1950s, if someone wanted to sort of entertain themselves, they had to sort of leave the home, right? And you left the home to maybe go hang out at a Kiwanis Club, Rotary, or to go bowling. The important point is, when you go bowling, go to a bowling league, it's an institution that draws people in without screening for all the kinds of things we like to screen for in our friends today, which say, heaven forbid, I would spend time with people who don't agree with me on every possible matter under the sun. Right, what we cared about back then was, I just care that you bowl. I'm not looking to be your best friend.
Yeah.
I just want a guy or girl I can bowl with and meet up weekly, monthly, and have a fun time with. Well, obviously, over time, you build this rapport with these individuals that you're bowling with, and this sets in motion a number of serendipitous positive externalities, right? Which is to say, I start to care about those other people. and start to learn some things about them. Like, for instance, their kids may go to a school that is a feeder into the same high school that my kids will ultimately go to. So election day rolls around for the school board election, and I'm running late for class. I haven't had my coffee, but something tells me, John, be late for class, skip your coffee, go do the right thing by your acquaintances, maybe your friends at the bowling league. Care about them, care about their kids, go vote in that election.
Yeah.
Right. But with the fracture, but over time, these institutions faltered, in part because of the rise and ease with which we can sate boredom in the comfort of our own homes, whether that's the rise of LPs and cassettes and CDs, or Nintendos and PlayStations and home theaters, right?
Yeah.
Is now we're not forming those bonds. And that's led to a world where we're solitary, we're atomistic, we're often closer in some very real sense to people we interact with online than our physical geographic neighbors.
And we were talking about that. I think it's a great example because you and I are about the same age. I'm 55. And, we probably look back a little bit fondly if you watched Stranger Things much over the seasons, but that time frame, that early 80s, hanging out with your buddies on your bikes, playing Atari at your house because it wasn't connected network. You had to bring them over.
Yes.
I mean, and then like fast forward, I was saying like my daughters who are in their 20s now, but like when they were, middle school, high school, they were at that age where kids were like, people are starting to be on social media, Facebook and, Instagram, all that stuff. And I used to my wife and I, we just never saw kids coming over to the house. There wasn't a flood of kids coming in the house. They were always like connecting with their kids. I mean, they're on Facebook, whatever. And I think technology like that started, while it sent you like I could stay in touch with my friends, it's a different thing being in the same room having a conversation. And I do think
it's a totally different thing, right? And again, I mean, there's an example I can bring alive with this, right? Is my oldest son got a job at a firm, and they gave him the offer of, you don't need to come in. And he's like, Dad, this is amazing. I don't have to come in. I don't have to get dressed. I don't need to shower. I get to sit on my computer and get paid. I'm like, listen to your dad. I promise you, I'm right. You don't have to go in every day, but you have to go in multiple times a week. And in the early days that you're at this firm, you got to go in a lot. Please, please trust me. This is one of those times where he came back to me a few weeks later and said, Dad, you were right. Doesn't happen. I don't hear that. You don't hear that too often from kids, really. And he made this point because he said, look, Dad, I was in these meetings that first week, and it was like they were talking gibberish. I had no idea what the people in the meeting were talking about. They were using all these terms and acronyms and buzzwords that were literally a foreign language to me, right? And then afterwards, after the meeting, people started to clarify some of the things that I didn't understand in the meeting. Right. But this was after the meeting. This was in the corridor. This was grabbing a coffee before the next meeting. He starts to pick up via sort of osmosis and the language that was being discussed in the meeting that enabled people to make sense of what was occurring. And it was like then week 2 or week 3, suddenly he understands what's going on. Not quite capable of contributing yet. But then week 4, week 5 rolls around, suddenly, not because of what was learned in the meetings, but what was learned before and after and around the meetings, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly it all clicked into place. And he was like, if I had just been on Zoom or just been on Teams, I don't know if I ever would have got there. But if I had got there, it probably would have taken me 9-12 months, not 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah. And I think there's a lot in there.
No, totally agree. So maybe that's a good segue to talk about the genesis and the inspiration for your book, which is talking about social capital.
Yeah. So the book, I got my PhD in 2014. So I've been teaching social capital. I did some teaching during my PhD. Obviously, I was a little bit older than the average PhD student. I did it between 35 and 40. So I did some teaching on the topic during the PhD, but I've been teaching social capital and other topics reliably since 2014. And inevitably, if you do a good job as a teacher, which I do on occasion, I think, is you get asked, all right, you fired me up about this, John. Like, I want to read more about this, or I want to hand off a book to someone and kind of get them jazzed about this. And I think what I realized is, while Putnam's Bowling Alone is a fantastic book, right? While Ron Burt's Brokerage Enclosure and Neighbor Networks and Structural Holes are all fabulous books, there isn't quite a, accessible book that's oriented around, like, how can I actually fix this problem, right? Not merely diagnose it, but how can I fix this problem? And I met my co-author of the book, Seth Racklin, who spent his pre-academic career in the sort of risk and insurance space, principally at Capgemini. So much deeper in your field. You probably should have him on another time.
Yeah.
We met and just kind of had this shared sense of, why don't we write the damn book? Right? Maybe we should just write the book. And we started talking about that around the COVID time, which has accelerated some of these problems. Wasn't the cause, but accelerated them.
Right.
And it got to a point, I think, of 3 years ago, we were like, we got to do this. We like, someone needs to do this, and maybe we're as well qualified as anyone, right? Yeah. And we went down that path, and here we are. The book is written. We have a fantastic agent. We have a fantastic editor at Simon & Schuster, and book's coming out in November. But
fantastic.
That's a fantastic co-author.
Yeah,
that's the key. That's the key to writing a book: finding a fantastic co-author.
Awesome. So, John, how would you describe social capital?
Good. So I think of social capital as it's the way I often teach it is, think about it as the stuff, the glue, the intra-group dynamics that are often missed if we're simply looking at sort of human capital attributes, right? Think of social capital as sort of the molecular view of the world, not the atomistic view of the world, right? Yeah. In some sense, I might look and go, Brian's really smart. He's charismatic, he's charming, right? But then I put you with another individual, in your team who has some of those similar traits, but the two of you really don't like one another, right? And they just rub each other the wrong way, right? Well, from one vantage point, surely you're a superstar and they're a superstar. So 10 out of 10, magic happens, those positive synergies spill over. But in truth, the way people relate to one another, that is often hard to quantify or is kind of ignored, is value destroying, right? And it can be value creating, but it's often value destroying. And then I might argue social capital is kind of explaining the delta between the sum of the parts. We assume 2 + 2 is 6. And I'm going to suggest often 2 + 2 is 3. And social capital is kind of the piece in my mind that explains that gap, whether it's positive or negative, right? So it's the connections around all of us, right? And the value that those relationships can deliver for each of us, right? I mean, in some sense, the subtitle of the book is sort of the hidden asset behind trust, engagement, and performance, right? It's hidden. It's not obvious. We know intuitively it's there, right? But because it's hidden, because it's under the surface, it's not as obvious to many how to invest in it, how to nurture it, how to build it.
Yeah. Obviously we talked in reference to it, but think about it. Can you pinpoint a time when you're doing your studies when you think this concept of social capital starting to depreciate or deteriorate? Because I think it, as far as you're making the reference, going back to Bowling Alone, as far as you had to leave the house to go entertain yourself or connect with people. You didn't do Zoom calls in the 50s or 60s or 70s. The technology wasn't there. And is technology in your side? Maybe I don't want to answer your question for, but do you envision or see that technology has been sort of making this concept of the glue less organic, and therefore you got to put a little more effort into it?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very careful. I am pro technology with caveats, right? I'm not some, throw out the industrial, age. So I'm pro technology, but there's no question the acceleration of the sort of degradation of social capital is at least in part a function of us sticking too much technology between human relationships, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a call center rep, in India or Wyoming, not being trusted to drive the interaction themselves with the person on the call, but instead being told blindly read this script that's going to update on a decision tree based on outputs and dynamically configure the conversation for you. So your job is just to be a wind-up monkey and read the words in front of you, right? Yeah. There's a story we tell in the book that's actually about Seth's son, who at some point had worked in a kitchen, all right, in a restaurant, and there was this, I waited tables when I was a grad student years ago, and the bond between the wait staff and the kitchen staff was tense at times, but it was real, right? We were friends. At the end of the night, we went out and we had drinks together. During the night, we shouted and screamed at each other because they did things that frustrated us and we did things that frustrated them. But there was an interaction, right? We went in the kitchen, we looked them in the eye and said, I really need this, please. Trust me, get it fixed. A lot of restaurants today, right? There's no interface between the wait staff and the kitchen staff. They bring a tablet to your table, they punch the order into the tablet, and it appears on a screen in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
That's efficient. That's great. Maybe, but efficiency isn't always the right play, right? Efficiency means suddenly now the front office and the back office, or in this case, the kitchen staff and the wait staff, don't interact, don't have a rapport. You're suddenly not running a cohesive restaurant. You're running an umbrella organization with two subunits in it. And we've become to venerate and over anchor and optimize for efficiency.
Yeah.
And I don't want an efficient meal, or an efficient meal is McDonald's every day. And there's a place for efficiency, but it's not every time, right? I don't want an efficient haircut. When I go to have a haircut, I want to talk about things. I want to hear a little bit of gossip. What's going on in town? What are they hearing from other of their clients, right? And that's the piece that efficiency kind of robs us of in part.
Well, it's a great point, John, because I think about your career and you're working at Accenture and I'm sure you're in consulting jobs. The one maybe underlying was that your management wanted you guys to help them become more efficient and improve gross margins. And how can you do that? And I could, in my mind, white collar jobs, with technology, it'd be finance, insurance, a lot of these jobs, like you think about how like in Dallas, I can tell you right now, we have one of the largest, from a downtown urban perspective, we still have one of the largest vacancies amongst office buildings, because now there's a whole lot of reason for that. Go build a big campus in the north, you get more, it's cheaper, but you had everybody had an office and you had a secretary, but then technology, and then you don't need as many people now. You have open, it's called the no office, but open space, and you have maybe a locker. You put your stuff in a locker, you come back. Yeah, you're still coming. And then COVID comes along, and then now people realize, we can make profits. We don't need all this real estate space. And so it's like, I can see they want to drive gross margin and increase revenue per person. But at the same time, you're kind of pulling away that cohesiveness that allows you to have tribal knowledge and teach the next generation and have teams.
And then it's done in this heavy-handed way, right? We've seen the backlash to work from home, right? And hybrid first, which is suddenly you're all going to be in the office Monday, Friday, 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever, right? And while there's a part of me says, well, in some ways that's good, in other ways it's terrible. Right. Yeah. The reality is life is about trade-offs. And I think what COVID did teach us was there's value to having time during the day to get some of those errands done. Right. So that I'm not getting home from my 9 to 5 job and then I've got to do my laundry, got to go out the grocery shopping. There's something that's nice about making a personal and professional life sort of match a little bit better. But I think what often happens in firms is we drag everyone back, but without any thought. What happens is everyone sits in these open plan offices, puts in the noise canceling headphones, and gets on the next Zoom call And it's comical and tragic at the same time, where we've dragged people in, forced them to sit on the train for 90 minutes to get in downtown. They're then sat noise cancelling headphones over the laptop in an open plan office on a Zoom call with other people who are in the freaking same office. Right? I can't tell you how many times I talk to friends and students who experience that daily. I'm like, why am I coming in? I'm on a Zoom call, and yes, the person is in the building, but in no meaningful sense are we interacting face to face. We are still interacting through a digital medium.
John, it's so funny you mentioned, because I at my office we're USI, we've incorporated, we have Zooms like everybody else in Teams, and I've had it where I'm in my office and there's someone who's he's like right outside my office in a cubicle, and I go, no, dude, come here, get here to the office, or my manager is like just around the corner. I go, nope, come on, let's just sit here together, because I hate the whole default to the Teams call. It just, it's that push-pull technology. But then, so maybe, John, this leads to my next question.
Yeah. So
obviously, like, I can see how that everything you're describing is probably what you see from like investment banking and insurance, high white collar jobs, not a whole lot of overhead, and you can do it remotely. Have you seen, if you don't, this book, like say a hospital? Yeah. Hospital, like, ain't no, other than like back office billing, the doctors, everybody's got to be there. So have you seen or noticed, is there certain business or models that it's doing better with social media as far as like a hospital versus
I don't think I think your point is exactly correct, which is, look, there are whole vast swaths of work that are done in environments that are largely insulated from the big levers we're talking about here, right? Hospitals are a good example, right? You got to be there, you got to be here in the flesh, you're talking to people. But let me caution, right? Restaurants would seem to fall under that umbrella, True. Right? Yeah. I've just got this story that has substance to it. It's a real thing. It is in the book, right? It's developed, right? Is that technology suddenly becomes this sort of layer that disintermediates the relationship between two, in this instance, teams of people, right? In hospitals, right? It might be that now I'm capturing vitals, electronically, rather than I'm walking around and sticking a thermometer in each other, a patient's mouth. Right. Well, that might be really efficient, but on the other hand, are you maybe not capturing that in the moment thought that maybe it isn't about the temperature being monitored, it's about the compassion, the point-to-point interface, human to human, while someone's in bed feeling sickly and someone here giving them a human touch and showing they care about them. Yes, they're there to take the temperature, but that's almost like the forcing function to have that moment of intimacy that says someone still cares about you. We want you to get better. So I think that industries that are face-to-face, are insulated from some of the bigger stuff, but I wouldn't want to go full bore, no problems at all. I think that the hospital, the restaurant story is a cautionary tale that even worlds where people are interacting face to face can be damaged in non-trivial ways by this. But look, truthfully, where's the big problem? Where should we really be focusing our attention? It's the white collar workforce who are in this instance really suffering.
So, John, if someone's watching this and they got a millennial, Gen Z, and we're hitting all the bells, loneliness, remote, what would you suggest? Like anything else, if I come into your class, I hope you're going to learn something, or if you're going to read a book, what you're going to take away something from it. If someone's coming in to like say, hey, I want to increase my social capital in this technology world, what would you suggest are the best sort of course of actions?
Yeah, I mean, so let me answer it this way, which is, originally we were thinking the book was going to be targeted to a sort of mid to senior level leader about what are some big shifts you can make in your organization to sort of fix some of these problems. And I think our editor at Simon & Schuster was adamant that, look, don't write that book. Write the book that can provide solutions for the 22-year-old, the 25-year-old, the 32-year-old. People earlier in their career who can't necessarily pull the big levers, right? So what do? Here are some things that seem silly, but actually aren't, right? Take a different route to your desk the days you come in, right? Think about all those serendipitous interactions that occur when you take this stairs or this elevator versus the elevator a little bit over there. Take a long meandering walk to your desk, right? Make an effort to get coffee, not from the coffee station nearest your desk, maybe not even on your floor, right? Go to another floor. Right, the value of the water cooler in serendipitous interactions is one that we is well understood by many, but how many people are strategic about leveraging this? Right, those casual conversations that occur around the coffee machine, around the water cooler, are extremely important. So much so that big companies, right, Apple, Pixar, Shell, right, make serious efforts to try and manage the flow of traffic in these organizations, right? And yes, if you're a 22-year-old, you probably haven't got the ability to say, you know what, we should re-architect the building to make the central atrium and the stairwell act in a way that encourages people to flow through other teams to create serendipitous interactions. That's true. But you can change the path you take through a building, the people you interact with. Yeah. So I think it's advice like that. It's also advice that says, look, not every connection needs to be built with a near-term payback in mind, nor should every connection be obviously professional.
Yeah.
Right. In truth, we should be investing in sort of micro relationships, not with an expectation there's going to be near-term payoff, or indeed perhaps any payoff. Right?
Yeah.
The thought is, be someone who does favors as best you can for other people and makes an effort to invest in those relationships, even if only in a modest way throughout the years. And often things come full circle. And I think we would be a good example of this, Brian, right? I remember you well from that class we taught years ago, but we haven't had beers, we haven't had dinner.
Love to.
We have sent the occasional email back and forth, and you've been proactive about staying in touch, and here we are today, and I suspect we'll continue to build this and talk some more.
Absolutely.
So I think there's an answer in there, maybe multiple.
John, I think that's a key thing that, it was a great book I read. I haven't finished, but The Power of Reciprocity. The concept of just like, not everything needs to be transactional, because sometimes if you're always transactional, it's paper. It's obvious you're being transactional. It's just having a genuine interest of the next person. You have to be best friends, but at least get to know someone, get to have someone. And then, I believe paying it forward, knowing that, down the road, this maybe call it karma or whatever, or your reputation starts to precede you, that people understand that, this guy he's here to help. He's not here just to be get something out of me. He's actually someone I can call and ask for a favor down the road, or I got a problem, let me call this guy. And that's a big thing I try to approach, John, and that I remember from your class and everything I've learned going forward is this, these microtransactions, these little things, the small things, is going a little bit out of your way. And I think what's probably anything, we're just so, as a society, and I don't want to blame just technology, but I just think we've all gotten more insular.
I think that's true. I mean, I teach both kind of the social capital stuff and sort of negotiations and decision making, and which are often taught as sort of separate spheres, right? And I think my point is, you really can't disentangle these two topics. And I'm pretty sure that's probably how I covered it when I taught you guys years back, right? But there aren't many people who are teaching kind of this stuff at the intersection for a variety of reasons. But I think that's the sweet spot is, how do we use behavioral science to help build the networks that comprise our work and professional lives, right? Because these, network science is a behavioral science, but they are mutually interesting to one another, right? So something we learn from behavioral science is the importance of the norm of reciprocity, right? That we build relationships through the sort of back and forth. I do you a favor, however small. Not only do you feel obligated to return that favor, but you actually feel obligated to return the favor with a little bit of interest. I buy you a small coffee. right? Next week we pass the same patisserie, and you go, John, have a cappuccino or have the same small coffee, but their pastries are fantastic here, right?
Yeah.
So we escalate this back and forth, almost like a tennis game, right? The more the ball crosses the net, the deeper we cement our relationship. And I think I would encourage young students or not so young students that more opportunities for back and forth. The more little things you can do that, maybe the favor doesn't get returned immediately. Maybe it's back and forth every 3 months, but you build rapport and trust through those back and forths.
And so, John, I believe kind of the next question, again, just take a second for everybody who's joining us. I'm interviewing John Burrows, professor at the University of Chicago. If you have a question for John, look at the bottom right-hand corner. You can see my picture. It's got add a comment next to it. Type in your comment, press enter, and I'll bring it to John's attention as long as you keep it PG. So, John, one of the things we've talked about this, and it seems like the same thing is like, okay, there's part of your career is just like, say, this younger generation, they come to work. If they do come to the office, remote, whatever. But then there's like after 5 o'clock, it's like that's it. And not saying you gotta have your work, you want to go home, but like going to have happy hour with your colleagues or going to local trade association, networking event, whatever. It just seems like that is not part of the MO, I think, of this younger generation.
And it's not, and it's kind of a horrifying degree that I didn't quite realize until I sort of invited out to dinner a large group of former students of mine. In fact, Seth Racklin, my co-author, and I did this, right? He taught at U Chicago for a while. We thought, you know what, before we finish this book, let's at least kind of bring people in and confirm, like, is he quite as bad as we're saying it is, right? Is it really, are people really as lonely in the workplace? And I think we were hoping or perhaps expecting to have a bit more positive feedback, which was, no, it's not that bad. But what we heard was actually, it is that bad, right? And again, I don't want to, a woman who was a student of mine at U Chicago, a public policy student at Harris, working at a social sector organization of stature. Right, people will have heard of this organization, right? And it's the kind of organization you go, well, if I'm going to go anywhere to find like-minded people who want to make the world a better place, who want to get together after work to go hash out societal problems and fix them, and I'll meet my future friends and maybe a husband or a wife, this would be where I would go. And still nothing, right? Work has become kind of, I'm going to go in, it's transactional. I don't feel bonded to the organization. I don't feel bonded to the people. The mission doesn't necessarily inspire me. And I'm going to go home and do my own thing. And often the go home and do my own thing is also a fairly solitary endeavor. It's not, I'm going to go home and hang out with my real friends, right? It's I'm going to go home and hang out by myself, right? So I think people need to think, how do we fix it and recognize not every bond needs to be a professionally oriented one. I think we think that networking, right? Awful word in the just go to a cocktail event, right? It always needs to be professional in orientation, and I think that's a huge miss, right? Go join, the Kiwanis Club, right? Go join a running club. Get on Meetup, right? Find people who are doing things you enjoy or might enjoy. Just get out there, right? And it's connection we need, and maybe it will have benefits in our professional lives, right? Again, the research is pretty overwhelming that it's those sort of weak, distant ties. That someone you meet at a running club who, 3 years later calls and says, "We need someone who does, I think, just what you do. Can we hire you?" But that's not the reason you join the running club, I don't think. You join the running club because you want to hang out with other people who are running, and it's kind of fun to hang out with other people who like running, and maybe that'll make you better. But it often has spillover benefits over the long haul that can pay dividends in other spheres of our life, professional and whatnot.
Yeah, and as we're getting close on time, is like, for me, I do commercial insurance brokerage, but I focus on construction and real estate. And I learned years ago when I started chasing this in the world of construction, someone told me, like, in the world, they want to know you first before they do business with you first. because it is a relationship-driven industry where you rely upon all the subs to do their job, and you're placing the risk on them. So there's that trust that has to be developed and built up. So it is, for me, that's why a big reason outside of work, you know, I have bandwidth. I'm kind of like empty nester like you, but like I'm involved with the trade associations, with the AGC and CFMA, and I volunteer every now and then, and I present when I can, because it's trying to build up that brand, and I just can't do it by cold calls and emails and dropping off a bottle of liquor every now and then. Is it like, it has to be
absolutely. And I think, you know, I think I told the story. I tell the story in the book, I tell the story in the classroom, but it's a vivid one to this observation, which is, you know, these effects are true around the world, right? I had a US consulting client of mine. We're looking to break into China, and they sent a contingent of people to go over there and negotiate a deal. And these are savvy people, right? But they thought that the focus of the week was surely going to be at least somewhat on like financial contract terms of how we might jointly do business together. And they spent an entire week sort of boozing it up in Shanghai, right? And they had a lot of fun, maybe too much fun, right? But in truth, what didn't hit them, and it should have hit them, because these are sophisticated people, is they didn't appreciate quite how much value Chinese, especially, right, put on the relationship, right? Such that first week of interaction, we don't want any conversation about financials. We don't want any conversation about contract terms. We just want to establish, do we trust you? Right? They flew back to the US kind of not despairing, but it felt like they'd kind of messed up. And kind of a bit of a waste. Might have had a fun week, but clearly the business relationship wasn't going somewhere. And they got a call back a week or so later, come back again. Oh, grief. Expecting another week of carousing and having fun. And they had some of that, but in truth, what they quickly realized was, we can craft a contract. We want to do business with you. We like you. The terms are going to shake out relatively easily because we've got that bond. And I would say much of the world operates in that way. Right? Trust is foundational to everything we do.
Yep, agreed. So we actually got a question coming in, John. So this is coming from Mike Lawrence. Since we think it is still that bad, what suggestions do you have to improve it?
Still that bad? I mean, look, I think how we make it better is, I think if you're a senior decision maker in an organization, you need to be put in place both from policy changes within the firm, but also from how you and other senior execs within the firm behave. The glue that holds people together is the foundational matter of an organization. It is not a nice to have kind of thing. We need to think much more deeply about how we connect to one another in a hybrid workplace, right? That means we don't have those corridor conversations, because there are no corridors in Zoom land. Yeah. But there are pre-calls, there are post-calls, there are private chats among discrete members of a team while on the broader team call, right? So it's that ability to check in and care, right? Let's have a conversation that maybe takes 15, 20 minutes, but ask some questions that are heartfelt about, how are you? How's your family? How are the kids, right? We kind of say, it comes back to this sort of ruthless efficiency, which at times masquerades for respect. I want to respect your time, Brian. So you want to respect my time. So we cut to the chase and just talk business. No, we need to be more inefficient, spend more time being curious about one another and our broader lives, right?
Do you have any anecdotes, or if you can provide names, like companies that you know that are being proactive in doing some certain things that are trying to make that stickiness occur?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lovely example, and it's going to seem a little like as if I'm making a joke with it, but I'm not, right? Yeah. So the company Shell, and it's from a few years ago, and the full story is told in my book, but they were struggling with a particular individual who I interviewed in my book, Paul Bogers. He's now at GE Vernova, but when he was at Shell, he had a fairly senior role. where he was managing a large team of scientists and another large team of engineers. And I suspect from your world, you have a sense, and your listeners' world, scientists and engineers don't always sit well with one another, right? Right? Is that scientists think pure, deep thoughts, and engineers are grubby little people who make stuff happen, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't always sit well with one another, right? But obviously, much of business depends on getting different groups of people, right? Whether it's different nationalities, whether it's different functional roles, whatever it might be. We've got to get you to talk and figure problems out together, because that's how we create value. And what he realized is they're geographically diverse across a campus in Germany, as it happened. And he said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? They all like coffee, and we have really mediocre coffee machines right now. So he got sign off to spend a pretty ungodly amount of money on some really fancy espresso machines, a good number of them, scattered them across campus. So there were multiple in the engineering area, multiple of them in the science area. This is where it got clever, is he would break the machine. He didn't actually break
turn them off. Okay, yeah.
But he'd put a sign on them.
All right, yeah.
He'd be intelligent about, which one. If I break the machine here, those guys and girls who are all addicted to their fancy espressos and cappuccinos and so on are going to go to the next nearest machine. Okay. And I can be thoughtful about, to get the next deliverable done that the team's focused on, do I need that team interacting with those people? So again, the point being, he would strategically break different machines.
Love it.
Depending on who he wanted mixing with whom. It got to a point where the company that was selling the machines got visibly irate and started threatening lawsuits, because they were like, our machines don't break, they're expensive, they're reliable, they're bulletproof, and here you are telling everyone they're breaking all the time. But it's a lovely story. I'm not saying everyone has the funds to go and buy a bunch of fancy espresso machines, but equally, what's the extreme example of this is, Pixar or Apple literally re-architecting their headquarters to change the way in which traffic flows through an organization, such that they can upskill the team that right now is creating a fledgling cartoon that isn't Toy Story or Cars, but could be if that group sat in the same network, right, as the Cars team or the Toy Story team. And that's really a Pixar. And Steve Jobs was a huge believer in the value of social capital, such that he hired first Joel Pedoni from being the dean at Yale School of Management to be his first founding dean of Apple University. And then Joel moved on, is now running a great ed tech company. He was gracious enough to give me an interview for the book. And now Morten Hansen has just been hired as the new dean of Apple University. You may remember Morten Hansen's name from the T-shaped Manager, the article that I will have assigned you. As one of the key articles to read. And any listener, it's a Harvard Business Review article from, I think, 2001, the T-shaped Manager, Morten Hansen. Absolutely fantastic article on the importance of, you need to invest in the stem of the T, right? I won't stand up because I'll go off camera, right? But it's good to have functional skills, right? But the arms of the T, the ability to move knowledge from one sphere of knowledge, one domain to another, is something that's critical importance. And to put this in context for younger listeners, like what's career advice I give some people is often move slower. Don't be so anxious to climb the corporate ladder upwards. Slow down, make lateral moves. Right? Learn the language of marketing, learn the language of operations, learn the language of risk, learn the language of accounting and strategy, right? That's going to set you up for a much more successful career in the long haul than rushing up the ladder vertically.
John, and I think to almost kind of wrap this up, and I think you're kind of touching on it, I think that's the benefit of a liberal arts education, as far as...
Indeed. To go back to Steve Jobs and his calligraphy classes at Reed.
Yeah.
Right?
No, exactly. In fact... kind of have a sense of like what's, you probably know the analogy as well, like the fox and the hedgehog. Hedgehog knows one thing very well. The fox knows many things. And so that's, I think, if anything, it shows the ability to, especially to your point, how does interacting in China impact business transactions? Well, that's a cultural sensitivity, where like understanding cultural and history of a region, how that comes into play in a business as well. So yeah.
No. I think much more realistic for most of us to not aspire to be the best at one thing, right?
Yeah.
Be really good at 4 or 5. That's much more tractable and arguably much more powerful in the modern workplace, right? Which is not quite the same as be a generalist, although I generally say that too. But it's be really pretty damn good at 4 or 5 things rather than just make yourself the best at one. Because you're probably not going to end up being the best at one. Because if you're only playing one battle, someone's going to have you beat on that. Right? Certainly, I would say I am decent at a handful of things and not world class at any one. Right. And I might say that's not a bad place to be. And I don't mean that with a false sense of modesty. Right. Yeah. I'm pretty good at a handful of things. I'm not world class at any one.
Yeah, I'm with
that's
you.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, John, I don't want to rush on time, so we're going to finish this up. So, John, when you're not writing or teaching at the University of Chicago, what do you do in your free time?
Well, building a house has been my entirety of my free time the last 3 years. Yeah. I will actually say I'm 52. I spend a lot of my weekends on my tractor. I wish I could pretend. When I was younger, I thought when I got enough money to have a third vehicle or a fourth fun weekend vehicle, I thought it might be like a 911, some kind of convertible, right? Some kind of fun sports car. But then I realized actually that my tractor is kind of fun. So I have a John Deere 3038E. I sometimes am creating value with what I'm doing, and other times I'm moving mulch around. But I really enjoy moving mulch around. I'll be honest.
Are you actually growing crops?
We do. There are crops growing on my land, but I would say the farmer who rents pasture from us is doing most of the growing, right? Or at least attending. But one day, when this book is written, maybe the next book is done, I've got visions of maybe tending my own crops. But life's been in the way the last few years to make that a reality.
And so, John. Being that you've got it sort of, you had a foot in England, I imagine you travel quite a bit. I mean, what are some of your favorite spots to go visit?
Oh, great question. So I spend these days a lot of time in the UK. I teach at Oxford, right? So I spend at least a couple of weeks each year at Oxford, and I think Oxford is one of those places, and to a lesser degree, Cambridge, friendly rivalry between the two English institutions, are, I think, as impressive as cities as Florence. I would actually argue more so, right? Wow. And this isn't trying to rain on Florence's parade, but I think Florence is not Rome. Florence is not Paris, right? And I think that if you're in the sort of might go and spend some time in Florence, I think Oxford is every bit as impressive, if not more impressive than Florence. Really? And yet very few Americans would say, you know what, we're going to London, we should go spend a couple of days in Oxford. So I think Oxford's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Tokyo. I think there's something very beguiling about the.
That's a big town, man. That's a big town.
It's a big. I think I travel a lot, and Tokyo remains the most foreign feeling place. Like it might as well be Mars in a crazy good way, right? Yeah. I can go to Beijing. I can go to Riyadh. Go to Hong Kong. Go to Madrid. These all feel Delhi. I don't want to say pedestrian, but very accessible, very normal, very safe in some sense. Tokyo doesn't feel that way. Tokyo is just another place, another planet in a way that is endlessly fascinating and appealing.
Yeah, I was in Tokyo, it was called probably like 12, 13 years ago. Just overwhelmed how big that place is. And just
mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. It's clean as everything. People are extremely nice, but man, it's just like...
Cape Town's spectacular. I spent a lot of time in Cape Town. I think Rome is probably historically my favorite city. I haven't spent as much time there as I would like, but I've always really enjoyed Rome. Awesome. Hong Kong's beautiful. Singapore, great food.
Yeah, Singapore. Actually, it really is. Chili crabs. It's really impressive, that place. So
yeah, you can go and have a Michelin star hawker stand. You can literally go into like a covered food market and have a Michelin star meal for like $10.
I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. John, thanks so much for your time. So let's again, what's the name of the book and when does it come out?
It's called Social Capital at Work. It's going to be published by Simon Acumen, an imprint of Simon and Schuster.
Got it.
Publication date is November 2026.
Awesome.
And we'll be launching a website very soon. The website is socialcapitalbook.com.
Okay.
So it's socialcapitalbook.com. Under construction right now, but give us a couple of weeks.
Nice.
If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. Good. And I think I'm going to start to be more active on other social media with Seth Racklin, my co-author, as we get serious about sort of building a platform and momentum around the book.
Absolutely. John, thanks again so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure, Brian. Take care.
You bet. So that's another episode of 60 Seconds of Risk. As you can see, when I first met John, he was immediately one of the people I wanted to have on this show when I was thinking about bringing information to people, bite-sized piece of information to help understand their careers, the world, and how to make improvement. And not just your business, but also your personal life. Because as John made a reference to it, and I think we all feel it and see it, we're just not as connected as we used to be. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. We can obviously technology is like an accelerant, but there is just a sort of a degradation, a breakdown of just the cohesive bonds that we have as individuals. So hopefully anything, this is maybe going to bring a light onto the problem and maybe get people to think about it, some suggestions to do it. But like to John's point, this, go have coffee with somebody at your office you haven't talked to recently. Take a walk around your office, the big loop, just to see people. Just get out of your comfort zone and just, put yourself out there and try to establish those connections, because it is, at the end of the day, we're humans and we crave relationships and we need to be able to communicate and talk to each other. It's really hard to do that on a tablet. So I hope you guys enjoyed this show. Like all things, guys, if there's a topic or individual you'd like to see, please send me a note, and you can see this video and all my other videos on my YouTube channel. Until next time, guys. Bye.